Hello everybody. I would like to show you something more about randomizing positions and rotations and scalings of objects. Several objects get the same texture, for example, and the texture is rotated, it's moved, and it's mirrored by random. Okay, so this is something I would like to show you. In the first video, I just showed you how to move the textures by random, and now I learned something more. I tried to figure out how you can not only position the textures in a random way, but also rotate them in 90 degrees increments, but also by random, and then scale them, that is, give them a negative or positive scale value, so they are in fact mirrored, and this again by random. So when you compare this image to this one, I'm sorry, I'm still at screen flow, so now I can change it. Here you can see the objects have the same texture, and the texture is aligned the same way. This is the initial look, how it normally looks when you give it the same texture projection. So in this case, it's all the same. And what I managed was to rotate the texture, and as I said, in 90 degrees increments, move the texture not in increments, just in X and Z direction, and then also change the scaling from positive to negative, so we have a mirror effect. I think you can see that the texture is the same. For example, these two are nearly the same. They're moved a little slightly. And then there are sometimes mirrored and turned, rotated, so it looks like a complete different texture on each of the objects. So how to do this? Well, let's change to the initial file, because here we have the objects, the 25 cubes, and they all have this texture tag, and it's all done in cubic mapping, and it's the same scaling, so the initial state is the same position, same scaling for each of the texture tags. And again, in this file I have my formulas that I will use just as names of non-objects, so it's easier for me to just copy those formulas and put them into the appropriate value fields. Okay, so first of all, we want to rotate the texture on each of the objects by random, and not only by random, but also by 90 degree steps. So each of the textures might have a 0, 90, 180, and 270 angle. 360 would be the same as 0, so we only have to deal with 0, 90, 180, and 270. So how do we do this? And as a matter of fact, we have the appendix in the Cinema 4D help, but I would like to do it a little bit more, make it a little bit more understandable, and I tried to comment on the functions and variables I use. And I did this in PowerPoint, so this is a little bit better to read. Okay, so R&D in brackets A produces or is a variable for a random value. Okay, and A tells us what is the range between Cinema 4D produces this random value. So when A is a number, the value is produced between 0 and this number that is symbolized by A. So if there would be a 2, Cinema could, for example, produce 1.74 or 0.23 or something else. So this is a random value that Cinema 4D can produce. Now we have a bunch of objects, and we want to have Cinema produce an individual random value for each of the objects. But again, we activate all objects and implement this formula, and we want, nevertheless, that Cinema produces an individual different value for each of the objects. So we have to use X. We have to use X plus, and then this R&D variable, okay? So this is what we did in the first video, and this is what I learned from Tim Clapham, actually, whose video on the Attributes Manager I also linked in my Facebook page. So I try to walk on from this point of knowledge and try to figure out how we can have random values. So first of all, there is another function that turns decimals into integers, and when we want to achieve a result like 0, 90, and 180 and so on degrees, we need integers, of course. We can't make any use of decimals. So what round in brackets a does, it turns or changes a from a decimal into an integer. So when a is, let's say, 11.8, the result would be 12. Okay, so again, we can combine these two. We have round RND in brackets a, RNDA. Let me call this RNDA. This variable is producing a random value, as I said, and when you put this into this formula round in brackets a, as I showed you before, Cinema4D will produce a random value, and then, in a second step, so to say, round will make an integer out of it. So whenever you take a range, like for a, let's take 12, you have a range from 0 to 12, and in this range, Cinema4D would produce a value like 11.8. The round function would make 12 out of it. Okay, so this is a first step which is very useful for our 90 degrees increment rotation. Again, don't forget that when you want to have individual results for each of the objects that are treated the same way by the formula, we have to use the x variable. In this case, it's x plus. We'll see that we will do it in a different way. But first of all, or not first of all, but as a conclusion, let's think about it again. We want to have values like 0, 90, 180, and 270. We don't need 360, as I said, because 360 and 0 is the same. So what we need is a formula, x plus 90. So this is the starting value we produce, and this is, of course, different for each of our objects. And or it's not different for each of our objects. It just will produce in the end, as a result of the complete formula, different results for each object. Okay, in the first place, it's not different. It's exactly the same because, as you can see, the angle that we start from is 0. So we have 0 for every of the texture tags, and so Cinema4D will take 0 plus 90. That is 90 as a fact, but as I said, using the x, nevertheless, will turn out to be produce a different value for each object in the end. So x plus 90 is 90 in the first place. It's multiplicated with this round function, and as a variable we use RND in brackets 3, because in fact we need a 3-step calculation. We have from 0 on, we have a range from 1, 2, 3 steps. So this is what I'm commenting on here, down here. Okay. So this is the next thing. So let's try to do this, and I can show you the function. I already wrote it down here. Random 90-degree rotation. We have the formula x plus 90 and have a multiplication x plus 90 in brackets times round in brackets RND in brackets 3 and 2 brackets for closing. So I can just copy this, and now we activate all the texture tags, and I'm just integrating this formula, this copied formula, in R.H. Okay, so now I hit return, and as you can see, here is Cinema4D writes multiple values, and as you can see, the textures have been rotated. Not all of them, but some. So now let's check it. We click on the first one, it's 270, then we have 90, then we have 90 again, then we have 0, then we have 90 again, 180, 180, 90, and so on. So they are all different, and this is done by random. So this is the first thing we achieved. Now there is another rather simple thing. We want to move the textures by random, and let's just decide for one of the cubes, so just to make it obvious which kind of value we want to change. So let's have a look at the at this object, and we just click on the texture tag. And as you can see, the px and pz values are the ones that move this texture, okay? In x direction and in z direction. Okay, let's just undo this. So what we have to do, we have to take this x plus rnd function that we know already. Okay, so this is just a repetition. And this is what we do. We add x to it, x plus rnd in brackets a, and of course we take 100, because as you might know, or as you might do it yourself, your texture size is always, or most commonly, 100 centimeters. So when you move this texture 100 centimeters, you move it in one module length, so to speak. So what we need is a random movement between 0 and 100. Everything above 100 would be the same again, so it doesn't make any sense. Okay? So let's get rid of these yellow cages. So again, we mark all our texture tags, and then this is a little bit more tricky as before with the rotation. We click on the X, and with Command or Control pressed, we click on Z2, and now we add the formula inside here. I can just copy it here, or I can write it again. This one is easy, X plus RND in brackets 100, closing bracket, and now I again hold down Command or Control and the return key, so Sema4D will accept the value, the formula for the px value field, but also for the other activated value field, which is in this case pz. Okay, so this is another trick. This is got nothing to do with formulas. It's just a normal Cinema4D trick. Okay, so now there's multiple values too, and as you can see on each texture tag, there's a different distribution of position values. So this is what we wanted. Okay, and now for the mirroring. So how do we do mirroring? Well, as you might know, as you might probably know, you do a mirroring via the, or you can do a mirroring via the scaling values. Okay, so in this case, if you replace the s.x value with a minus 100, just have a look on this texture, and you write down minus and you press return, you see that the texture is mirrored in x direction. Okay, I can redo it and then again do it. Okay, you see the mirroring effect. And then you can also do this for the z direction. The y direction wouldn't make any sense in this case. So what we need to do is to have a formula that replaces for s.x and s.z the by random the 100 centimeters value by minus 100 centimeters. So now this was something new for me too. This one, the first formula, I nearly figured out myself with a little help from Maxenhelp, but the formula I'm using now comes completely from Maxenhelp because I just couldn't make any sense out of the manual at this point. So I got help from the Maxen support. Thank you, and I would just like to report you how this is being done. This is the formula. Okay, so just to switch over to PowerPoint to have it a little bit more easily readable. We need a value either A or B, okay? So in this case we need either 100 or minus 100, but actually this is what we want to have basically. So there's a formula that is beginning with a condition. Something is a condition, question mark, and if the condition is fulfilled or true, we have cinema 4D take A. If not, we have cinema 4D take B. Okay, so this leads us to the result in the end, a formula where cinema can decide or has to decide whether to take -100 or positive 100 as B. Okay, so how is this done? The condition is this one. Have cinema 4D produce a value between 0 and 1. Okay, so this is x plus RND 1. This is something you know. Okay, so this part produces a value between 0 and 1, a decimal, most probably. So, and then we say to return cinema 4D, is this smaller than 0.5? Question mark. If so, decide for A. Okay, because this value is produced by a random calculation, it may be lower than 0.5 or it may be not. So we have a 50 to 50, what is that in English again? We have a 50 by 50 chance that cinema 4D will decide for A or for B. So this is just a comment on this. So if x plus RND 1 is smaller than 0.5, take A, otherwise take B. Okay, so we just replace A by -100 and B by 100, and this is the formula. Okay, so how to do this in the file? First of all, we activate the s.x and the s.z value. Okay, then we set both to 0. And I replace the s.x value by 0, and then I hit Command or Control return, so the 0 is put here too. We have to take the 0 before, because otherwise, oh, I'm sorry, we have to activate those texture checks before 0, and then Command or Control and return. Because we want cinema 4D to produce a value between 0 and 1, we need to have cinema 4D set the initial value to 0, so we can use the 0 as x plus RND and so on. This is the reason why we first of all changed the values for s.x and z to 0. Now we can use the formula, and as it is pretty long, I wrote it down here, so I can just copy this. And now we again have to activate all those tags, go to one of those highlighted values and press Command Control B, and then again Command and Control return to replace the 0 values in both fields with this formula. Okay, so now we can check this. Sometimes we have -100, sometimes we have -100 for both of them. So this is it. We have 3 formulas for 3 different things. We have a incremental 90-degree random rotation in one direction. We have not an incremental, just a random positioning in x and z direction for each of the tags, and we have this random decision whether x or z is set to -100 or 100. This is the formulas, and I hope you liked this, and see you next time. Bye.